I want to concentrate or bring your attention to that 15th verse in, as we've been talking about restoration all this year, 15th verse. Then Naomi, what does it say? He shall be to you a restorer of life. He shall be a restorer of life. God, Yahweh, Jehovah. You do know that God is not of this world. God is the creator of the world. God is the developer of the world. God is not an actor or a player, nor is he in the world. And because our God is not of this world or in this world, he is not constrained by the rules of this world. The laws of science do not apply to God. The principles of physics and the precepts of biology do not limit our God. Our God is sovereign. Whatever God declares, it must come to pass. Whatever God thinks, it must happen. Whatever God directs, it must come to place. Our God is not limited by time. God sits outside of time. He sits outside of matter. God is like he is outside the world, and God knows the beginning and God knows the end. I mean, God is the Alpha and the Omega. There is nothing that God does not know. There's no scenario that God is not aware of. There is nothing that you can do that can surprise our God. You can't catch God off guard. And you can't hide from our God. And there is no plan, and there is nothing that you can do that you can circumvent or try to get around the Spirit of God. And I don't pretend to know how he does it. I mean, I think about it often, how he can deal with every person in every situation, in every condition, and in every prayer for each and every person in this world. But God does, and God can. And I can only surmise that because God knows all, and God can do all, and God can think about all things and sees all things and knows the beginning and the end, that is the reason why God can work out everything for our good. For it says it, God is working out everything for our good. You didn't shout about that, but that was a shouting point if there was one at all. Don't you know that everything, I mean, if you are a believer, if you love the Lord, the Bible says God is working out everything for our good. And a lot of times we get excited about the everything for our good, but this morning I want to concentrate on the part where it says God is working. Do you hear that? God is not, he neither slumber nor sleeps. God is always working. For how do I know? The Bible says so. Jesus said in John, the 5th chapter, the 17th verse, he says, my Father is always working to this very day, and I'm working too. That means the three personalities of God, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, are always working for our good. Last week, God was working, and last night, God was working, and this morning, God was working. I mean, before you got up this morning and showered and brushed your teeth, you know our God was working it out for your good. And last night, wherever you may have been, when we were doing this or doing that, God was working it out for our good. And as you were traveling and trying to make your way to church, God was already putting people in places and situations to occur, for God was working it out for our good. I mean, before the situation, before the issue, before the divorce, before the layoff, before the betrayal, before the diagnosis, God was working it out for our good. Do you know before your mother met your father, before you were conceived, before you were a thought in your family, don't you know God was preparing for you and putting people in place for you and taking situations and circumventing them and causing them for your good? I mean, before you walked into church this morning, before you walked into church, God was preparing some pigeon-toed, nearsighted lawyer to preach a message to you, just for you, not for somebody else, but for you. God was preparing you. Before you got that degree, before you got that education, before you got that situation, God was putting an employer in place and a person to hire you and someone to mentor you. God was preparing something for your good. Nothing in this world is by coincidence, and nothing is by happenstance, and nothing is by luck. Nothing is by fluke. God is preparing and planning everything out for your good. How do I know? It says it by the prophet Jeremiah. For I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope in the future. Don't you know right now God is working it out for your good? Yeah, God is working, God is working, God is working. And that is my thesis this morning. It is not complicated, it's not that deep, it's not that intellectually stimulating, but it is some good spiritual stuff. God is working it out for your good. Can I give it again to you straight with no chaser? Maybe you need to hear it that way. God is working it out for your good. God is working it out, and that's not, and this is biblical. This is no, just something to make you feel good. Ephesians says God not only chose and predestined us according to his will, to his plan, but he also works out everything in conformity to his purpose that is in his will. And I have been pastoring just long enough to understand that somebody in this place is frustrated because they don't see the manifestation of God in their life. And I just came by to remind you, God is working it out. And I know somebody does not see the movement of God and does not see the power of God in their life, but I got to just remind you that God is working it out. And I know you've been praying for that thing and for that situation and for that healing, but it hasn't come to play in the time that you want it to come into play. But I'm here to tell you, God is working it out for your good. And there are some people under the sound of my voice that right now they are going through their own personal hell. They feel that there is no God. They don't feel the presence of God. They don't feel the movement of God. They don't hear God speaking to them. And I know they're tired, but I'm here to tell you, God is working it out for your good. And I know there are some people who are tired of going to see this doctor after that doctor and going to see this lawyer and then going to see that accountant and tired of this and tired of that. But I'm here to remind you, don't you throw in the towel, because God is working it out for your good. And somebody in the house today is tired of living life by themselves. Tired of that where's my he and where's my she? But I'm here to tell you, your blessing is right around the corner. God is working it out for your good. I'm tired of being broken. I'm tired of being hungry. And I'm tired of being sad. And I'm tired of being alone. Well, cheer yourself up, because God came by to tell somebody God is working it out. God is working it out for your good. God is working it out for your good. And the problem is we become frustrated and we become sad and we become despondent because we don't see that God is working it out for our good. And I just gotta just one more time remind you, don't you stop praying and don't you stop praising and don't you stop tithing and don't you stop singing, because all these things, all you need is a bit of mustard seed of faith, and our God will work it out for your good. You need some proof? You want a little proof? Ask Naomi. You know Naomi. You know, if you were to ask me, Naomi, that really should be the name of that particular Old Testament book. I mean, if you were really to read the story, it's really more about the situations and the trials of Naomi than it is about Ruth. I mean, if you didn't know no better and you opened up the book and you covered up the title, by the end of the story, you would have to say, it's really about the restoration of Naomi. Can I tell you the story? Can I tell you the story so you know? Because I know not everybody is a Bible reader. And I love this story so it's easy for me. You see, Naomi was married to a man from Bethlehem named Elimelech. And he had two sons. They had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And there was a famine in the land of Bethlehem. And rather than stay and starve, they heard there was food in the land of Moab. Now, they were forced from their place of comfort in Bethlehem to move to a foreign place in order to get fed. And you know, when I was reading through that first chapter, I simultaneously came across a meme, and I posted it on my own social media this week, and it said something like this: sometimes God closes doors because it's time to move forward. And God knows that we won't move unless our circumstances forces us to move. And then the meme said, trust the transition because God's got you. And in this life, we have to recognize that there are places where we are that is a place of famine, and it is God trying to push us to a place where we can get fed. And if we are not getting fed in the place where we are, God often moves us to uncomfortable places in order to get what God has in store for us. God often moves us from the comfortable place to the unusual place to fulfill his purpose and take us to our destiny. Oh my God, you don't know what I'm talking about. And it is the lack of this or the lack of that in our place in which we are that God is using to signal us to move to another place. So if there's no food where you are, I'm here to tell you, baby, it's time to go. If there is no respect where you are, it's time to go. If God is telling you it's time to go, if there is no trust where you are, it's time to go. It's time to go if there's no love where you are, it's time to go. This is the way God pushes you to that new place to fulfill his destiny or his glory for you and get his the glory. He moves you to a new place because you are not being fed where you are. So Elimelech and Naomi and Mahlon and Chilion, they go to Moab, and Mahlon and Chilion get married to two Moabite women. One marries Orpah and the other marries Ruth. And for 10 years, they're a happy family. They're a great unit. And then tragedy occurs, and Elimelech dies, and then Mahlon passes away, and then Chilion dies. The women are alone. Naomi in a foreign country. But just simultaneously as her husband is called to glory and her sons have gone from labor to reward, she hears that now there is food back in Judah, back in the place where she came from, Bethlehem. So what does Naomi decide to do? She decides to go back to Judah. And so Naomi tells Orpah and Ruth, go back to your families. You have no obligations with me. Go on back and be with your parents, and maybe somebody else will marry you, and you will have a family and have children. And then Orpah says they cry. And I always feel that Orpah cried a little crocodile tears because Orpah walks away. But Ruth clings to Naomi. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. She says one of my favorite biblical verses. To me, if we can incorporate it in every wedding, every vow, every relationship, so powerful. Ruth says this to Naomi: for where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. And your people shall be my people. And your God will be my God. And when you die, that's where I will die. And where you will be buried, that's where I'm going to be buried. The Lord do to me also if anything but death parts us from each other. I mean, that's a powerful statement. I mean, that's some real love. When you say, I don't care where you go, and I don't care what you go through, and I don't care your situation. I'm going to be there with you. And when Naomi hears this, she understands that Ruth is determined to go with her, so she doesn't say anything more. You know, there comes a point in the time in our own life when we have to shed some people that are not meant to travel with us, and we need to cling to those who are determined to stay with us through it all. I got one person who understands what I'm talking about. You know, Naomi did what many of us need to do. Don't you argue with those Negroes that want to leave you. Let them go. Don't try to hold them back. Let them go. Don't try to say, well, please stay with me. Let them go. There are some Orpahs in our life we need to block on social media. We need to block from our phone, remove them from our prayer list, and let them go. Say arrivederci. Sayonara. I'm talking about adios, goodbye, take off. I don't care. Go about your business. Don't argue with them. Just let them go. Just let them go. But there's a flip to that. There are some people in our lives that will fight for us through thick and thin. And I'm here to remind you, don't you push them away. Don't you cut your nose off to spite your face. These people are far and few between. Don't push them away by your own self-ego, by your pride, by your pettiness. Put all that stuff to the side and cling to those who will fight for you and fight with you through the fire. Too many times we alienate those who love us and care for us over nonsense. And I'm here to tell you, don't argue with them either. Hold on to them so you can go through the fire and fight with them just like you're going in the battle. Don't you know those friends and those loved ones come far and few between. So Naomi and Ruth, they travel back to Judah, to the town of Bethlehem. And the people are asking about Naomi, and they say, is that you, Naomi? Where you been, Naomi? What happened to you, Naomi? Where's your husband? What happened to your boys? And Naomi says, don't call me Naomi anymore. You know, Naomi means pleasantness. That's her name. Her name means pleasantness. He said, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Because Mara means bitterness. When we don't see the goodness of God in our life, it can make the best Christian bitter. When we don't recognize the movement of God in our life, it tends to make us bitter. When we feel that life seems to be dealing out disappointment after disappointment after disappointment, it can make us bitter. I mean, when you just get over this death and you got to deal with that death, it can make the best of us bitter. When we just had the opportunity to breathe after getting over that financial hardship, now we got to deal with this financial situation. It can make the best of us bitter. When those who we trusted, those who we allowed in our inner circle, those who we married, those who we raised, do things that totally disappoint us, it can make the best of us bitter. And when we become bitter, we become bitter with life and bitter with God. And when we become bitter to the point that we're mad at God, we tend to identify ourselves as being bitter. That's what Naomi did. She said, call me Mara. And you know some Maras in your life. You can see them coming a mile away. You know the Maras. I'm always broke. How you doing? I'm broke. Bitter. How you doing today? Oh, my back hurt. My knees hurt. Went to the dentist. My mouth hurts. You gonna be all right? No, I'm gonna be hurting tomorrow too. Their name is Mara. Oh, you know the type when you see them even in church and you say, I'm blessed, not stressed, and how you doing? No, I'm not doing too good. And you just have to say it. What's wrong? Well, you know, my child don't like me. He drinks too much. He smokes too much. She does this or she does that. And I'm just so sad. I just can't have the life that I want to have. Bitter. And those who speak, because you know there's power. There's power in the mouth and there's power in the spoken word. And those who always speaking are bitter about the people around them, bitter about other people. And those people are bitter about other people's blessings. You see so-and-so, don't you? Who she thinks she is in that dress. She ain't got no business wearing a dress that looks like that. Her figure don't fit that dress. What are you doing with them shoes? Shouldn't have that. Do you see that hair? That ain't her hair. What are you talking about? I don't know what they are. See, you're bitter. We got to stop being bitter. Stop acting like Mara. And the reason why we should not be bitter is because, and I need to remind somebody, God does not dole out bitterness. Did you hear the words of Jeremiah? The prophet said he has plans for you. Plans to prosper you, to give you hope in the future. Did you ever hear me say that God is planned for you to be bitter? I mean, if you have a reasonable portion of health and strength, then you have a reason to be pleasant. If you have a place where you can go on Sunday morning where somebody can pray for you and you can pray for somebody, you have a reason to be pleasant. If you have clothes on your back, you have a reason to be pleasant. If you can smile, no matter whether you got your teeth or dentures, you got a reason to be pleasant. If you can shake your head and feel the hair on your head, if it's yours or you purchase it on the corner, you have a reason to be pleasant. You have a reason to be pleasant despite your situation. If you are living right now on top of the earth and you ain't 6 feet under, can I tell you, you got a reason to be pleasant. You know, the media screen ain't working, but that brings me to my first point of this sermon. See, you got a reason to be pleasant because God is working it out, because God's timing is always perfect. Woo! I had to find that out for myself. I'm going to tell you, God's timing is always perfect. I know you may not see it when you're going through it, but God's timing is always perfect. See, Naomi didn't see it when she was in the midst of it, but by the end of the story, God's timing was always perfect. See, it's right there before you in the scripture. If you go to chapter 1, verse 22, your version or my version may say something like this. So Naomi returned. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. See, God forced her to Moab at a certain time so her sons could meet Orpah and Ruth. But at the time when it was time to come back to Bethlehem, God's timing is always perfect. He did it at the beginning of the barley harvest. Why was that important? Well, Naomi tells Ruth when they get there to go glean. That means go pick up the leftovers from the field. And Ruth starts to pick up the leftovers because you know it was the harvest season. And what happens? And behold, in chapter 2, verse 4, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. And behold means like suddenly. That's God's timing. And God's timing is always perfect. And Boaz preach, Pricey. I'm doing the best I can. Boaz took notice of Ruth and asked, who is she? And the workers told her who she was and where she came from. And the workers knew the story. That's because God's timing is always perfect. And if you didn't know, the custom at that time was the closest relative to the person that died had the opportunity to take all the belongings. And so Ruth liked Boaz and Boaz liked Ruth, but Boaz was not the closest relative. You see, so Boaz went to the gate. It says so, and it says, behold, when he got to the gate, soon as he got there, he sits down. And the scripture says that Boaz sits down, and behold, again, here's that behold again. That means suddenly. That means in God's time, the closest relative just happens to pass by. And Boaz says to the closest relative, listen, do you want all of Elimelech's belongings? And the guy says, yes. And he says, okay, then you got to take his wife and his mother and everybody. And he said, oh, no, I don't want that. There are people in your life who want the blessings but don't want the burdens. I said, that wasn't even in the manuscript. There are some people who are close to you who want to drain from you but don't want the responsibility of being with you. Oh, I got to teach that to my daughters right now. Somebody needs to hear that. They want what you got, but they ain't trying to be with you. They just want to take what you have, but they ain't trying to spend no time with you. That's why you got to be careful about the people you allow in your inner circle, because all they want to do is pray on you, not pray for you. So yeah. So God's timing is always perfect. And I got to tell you, more than anybody, this preacher up here, more than anybody, can understand your frustration with God's timing. Because God's time never seems to coincide with our timeline. What we want when we want it. But God gives us what we need when we can handle it. I need to tweet that right there. Now, let me tell you, God is not going to give you what you can't handle. God does not waste his blessings. So the two rarely work in tandem. God does not give you a husband when you had no idea what it's like to be a wife. Got quiet right there. God ain't going to give you a wife if you don't know how to stand up and be a man and be a husband. God is not opening doors for a promotion when you can't handle a decent job. God is not providing you the overflow when you can't tithe as a steward with the little bit you got now. It got real quiet there. God does not waste blessings and rewards on people who can't handle it, nor give God the glory with it. Often God holds our awards in abeyance until we are ready to receive it and use it for the glory of God. And so rather than complain about what you don't got instead of what you do got, maybe you should put yourself in a position to receive what God has in store for you. Yeah. God, maybe you should be praying a little different and acting a little different and preparing your body a little different. Quit putting such stuff in your body if you ain't going to be around long enough to receive the glory that God's going to give to you in the end. Yeah. So we have to put ourselves in a position to receive what God is going to do and prepare ourselves for what God is giving us, and so we can be able to receive it. But here's the second point of the message. God is working it out, but not how we think. God is working it out. God is working it out. God is working it out. But it's not how we think. It's in the book of Isaiah, God says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, and nor are my ways your ways. The Lord declares, as the heavens are higher than the earth, are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. I can bet you dollars to donuts, Naomi would have never wanted the way it happened to happen the way it did. She never would have wished some of the circumstances that took place in her life. She never would have said, "Oh Lord, send me to Moab." She never would have said, "Take away my husband and take away my baby boys." She never would have said, "Oh, when it's all said and done, take Orpah and send her this way, and keep Ruth with me so we can go that way." She never would have said, I want to spend a season of being bitter. That would have never been her plan. It would never have included any sadness, and it never would have included any regret. Nobody would write the script that would put some drama and nonsense and regret and pain in our life. But God has a plan, and God has a reason. And when we get in constant trouble, when we decide what is the best plan for us, when it is inconsistent with the will of God. There are some things you can't control, and there are some situations that you have no control of. You got to put things in the hand of God and trust God in the process. We need to learn, we need to learn how to turn it all over to God and trust that God will make it happen for our good. God is putting people in place right now and situations to occur and things to happen that we never dreamed or imagined. God thinks on a level that we can't comprehend and we can't understand. Don't you know, I just told you, God knows the end of the story. So God does certain things and does put certain people in our life for a season so it can work out together for our good. I wish life was gumdrops and rainbows. But life does not go like that. And God does not work like that. So rather than pray for how it should come to pass, my suggestion is pray for the outcome and let God deal with the process. Trust in the process. God is going to work it all out for good. Let God be God and you be you. God has got you, so you got to learn how to ride God along the way. Ride it out. When we're riding with God, no demon can block us, no hater can stop us, no demonic force can negate us. You got to let God be God and trust God in the process. What God has for you is for. Yeah, somebody been to church one or two times. Yeah. So God's way is not going to be your way, but God's way is going to be the right way. And often God will pull you back some of the drama, some of the trials, some of the situations. Well, he will use it to pull you back into the relationship with him so you can ride along his pathway, his highway, not your way. But here's the last point. When God works it out, God will restore you, but God must get the glory. Right? God's going to restore you. I can tell you that. I can testify. God will restore you, and in the process, God must get the glory. You see, I came all this way through the whole story to get to chapter 4, verse 15. Ruth, the Moabite, married Boaz. They had a child, and they named the child Obed. And the woman in Bethlehem said to Naomi, not to Ruth, they said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life. All the trials that she went through, all the things that the demons took away, all the evil that happened in her life, all the deaths that she had to deal with, and God restored her and took her to a new level. God did it. Nobody else did it. God restored her. God restores all that the enemy will take from you. And when God restores you, the purpose is so that God can get the glory. Oh, you ain't hearing me right now. God has a plan, and God has already worked it out. before the beginning of time, God worked it out so that Naomi would have Moab, and Naomi's son would meet Ruth, and God would work it out so they would fall in love, and God worked it out so that season would come to an end, and God worked it out that Ruth would travel back to Bethlehem, and God worked it out that Ruth would meet Boaz. But while all that was going on, don't you know that in Bethlehem, a man by the name of Salmon was having a son named Boaz, and Boaz and his family stayed in Bethlehem during the famine, and Boaz had a field, and he became a very rich person, and Boaz would come at an appointed time and an appointed place to meet Ruth. While this was going on, God had that going on. And when God has this going on, that is going on. God is working it out, even though you don't see it, even though you don't know it, even though you ain't prepared for it. God is working it out for your good. And here's this part of the story. There may have been a situation where Ruth had no children, and Ruth was not redeemed by any man. And Ruth did not have to, she could have stayed in Moab. She could have kept on dating. But no, Ruth came to Bethlehem in order to have a relationship with Boaz. God was working it out. Boaz loved Ruth, and Ruth ended up loving Boaz, and a son was born. And Boaz fathered Obed, and Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. And you do know who came from the line of David, don't you? You do know who came from King David. God has been working it out from generation to generation. Before the beginning of time, don't you know your God was working it out? God was working it out that from the union from Ruth and Boaz came a name that was above every other name. And from the union of Ruth and Boaz came a child, and on that child, the government would be on his shoulders, and he would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, and Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Don't you know God was working it out? A child shall be born, and every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess that he is Lord. Don't you know that God was working it out, that he shall be pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities? From the beginning of time, God was working it out. And then on a Good Friday, they nailed him to an old rugged cross on a hill called Calvary. They hung him high and they stretched him wide. But from the beginning of time, don't you know your God was working it out? And don't you know that early on a Sunday morning, where everybody was still asleep, he got up with all power in his hand, because God is already working it out. And from there, he got up with all power in his hand, and he's going to come back. He's going to come back from a cloud, because God is already working it out. So when he comes back, I don't know about you, but I'm going to meet him in the cloud. I'm going to meet my Jesus, because my God is already working it out so God can get the glory. Don't you know? Don't you know? God is working it out. God is working it out. I don't know what you're going through, but God is working it out. And I don't know what you're dealing with right now, but God is working it out. And I don't know what trials you got to deal with, but God is working it out. And when God works it out, don't you know it's all done so God can get the glory? It's not about you, boo. It's about God getting the glory. God is working it out. I'm finished. I'm finished. God is working. Everybody's standing if you can stand. God is working it out. God is working it out.